I'm going to be recording the first part of the Chapter 14 lecture on innate immunity. We're going to be talking this time about the defense mechanisms of the host in perspective about the immune system. So this is going to be section 14.1. We're going to be looking at three basis lines of defense. The first line of defense is going to be the barriers that are going to block invasion at the portal of entry. And those defenses do not involve recognition of foreign substances. They are defenses that are universal and can work without recognizing any specific part of the invader microorganisms, and they're therefore general in action. The second line of defenses are going to be nonspecific. They're an internalized system of protective cells, which are going to be the white blood cells of the granulocyte type, and they're going to involve the mechanisms of inflammation and phagocytosis. The third line of defense, I am not going to present a lot of work there because we're going to have chapter 15 to look into that, and that's going to be the acquired immune system that is going to be mostly involving lymphocytes, a type of white blood cells that can specifically recognize each microbe in a unique way and therefore provide unique protection against that particular microbe. And that is the system that is going to provide long-term immunity. So for this set of lectures, we're going to be focusing on the first line and the second line of defense. When we look at the host defenses, the first and second line of defenses are involved in what is called the innate or non-specific immune responses. The first line of defense is going to be the surface protection, composed of the anatomical barriers and physiological barriers that are going to keep the microorganisms away. We're going to be thinking of the physical barriers like the skin. We're going to be looking at the chemical barriers like the pH of the stomach, and we're going to look at how some of those vary based on genetic components. The second line of defense is going to be now happening once the organism goes inside the host cell. And now we have a set of cellular and chemical systems that are going to play an immediate role after the infectious agents go past the first line of defenses. So those are going to be cells specialized in phagocytosis, the complex of inflammation, fever, and the molecules that form the antimicrobial proteins. So when we think about it, we're going to be looking at the first line of defense, and the most extensive one is going to be the skin, the epithelial layer that is compacted, cemented together, and impregnated with the protein keratin. It's very tough, it's very flexible, and it helps prevent the microorganisms or any kind of external system from coming in contact with our internal systems. So it is thick, tough layer that is highly impervious and waterproof, and very few pathogens are able to cross that line of defense without having it unbroken. In the follicle system, which is part of the skin, we have the hair shaft, which are going to be producing hair, of course, and you have the follicle surge, which are desquamated. Therefore, there's a particular morphology of the cell. Of course, you have also sweat glands, which are going to be producing sweat, and sweat is able to remove a lot of microbes. So the skin has a low pH. The sweat also has pH and is composed of also molecules that are able to help prevent microbial growth. The wax in the ears are going to be secreted to prevent infection and microorganisms. The sebaceous glands that are probably found in all the skin. Tears that are going to be maintaining the eye sockets moisture and full of the enzyme lysozyme to prevent infection. I mentioned to you the internal mucosa that has mucus. Saliva, which has also the enzyme lysozyme. So we're going to be looking then at other one of those mucous membranes, and that's going to be part of the first line of defense. So the mucous membranes of the digestive, urinary, and respiratory tracts, and of course the conjunctiva of the eye. Those are most systems that are included in the general mucosa that we talk about. And they're moist and permeable. They provide a barrier that is not keratinized, and they all have a common layer of mucus that impedes the entry and attachment of bacteria. Now, in the respiratory tract, composed of the nasopharyngeal system as well as the lungs, we have hairs in our nose that are going to help trap large particles. We're constantly moving mucus, that mucus is able to trap particles as well as microorganisms, and the microvilli and cilia of the lung epithelium are able to move the mucus and flush it out. And in the respiratory tree, we have the ciliate epithelium, as I mentioned, that it helps move the mucus from the lungs all the way to the pharynx to be swallowed down into the digestive system. The urogenital tract and the digestive tract are also another part of the mucosa. In the urogenital tract, what we have is a protection through the continuous trickle of urine that of the ureters and the flushing of the bladder as it empties. That leads to a lot of the washing out of the microorganisms that could attach themselves to the membrane of the cells. And in females, we have vaginal secretions, which are going to provide a cleansing mechanism to the lower reproductive tract in the vagina. Now, in both the urogenital and the vaginal area, we have resident microbiota that provide antagonism to potential pathogens that are going to be trying to establish a hold. They compete for their resources and space. So they can block access of those potential pathogens to the epithelial surfaces that they are colonizing. And they're also able to produce an unfavorable environment because they're competing for nutrients, and most oftentimes they're also lowering the pH of the region and therefore making it inhospitable to other microorganisms. So now, as part of those chemical defenses that are found in the primary defense layer, we have, for example, enzymes that are going to have antimicrobial effects. So some of them are found in the sebaceous secretions. We're going to be looking at some of the proteins like defensins that are produced in those sebaceous secretions. We have the enzyme lysozyme that is found in tears and saliva that is able to break down the peptidoglycan layer in the cell wall of bacteria. We have the acidic components of the sweat like lactic acids and the acidic pH of the skin. And of course, a lot of the fatty acid contents that is found in some of the secretions like the wax of the ears. In the stomach, we have the large amount of hydrochloric acid, which brings the pH down to 2, and very few microorganisms are able to sustain that kind of acidity. In the intestine, we have digestive juices that are going to also help attack microorganisms as well as bile. And in other areas, for example, semen has antimicrobial chemicals, and the protective acid of the vagina maintained by the normal microbiota helps also lower the amount of microorganisms that can live in those environments. Now, there are genetic differences among many people, and that can lead to increase or decrease defenses against certain microorganisms. So, for example, some hosts are unaffected by one infectious disease, or other people are very susceptible to them. So some pathogens may have such specificities that one host is able to be affected while another one is not. And therefore, virus can only infect by attaching to a host that they have a receptor for. Those with a loss of lack of immune system, for example, are also more susceptible to infection. So victims with severe burns, people who may have immunocompromised systems due to disease or treatments like cancer, anti-cancer drugs, and other issues that may affect people like blockage of the tear ducts, salivary glands, intestinal and urinary tract infections. So the first line of defense alone are oftentimes effective to block a lot of pathogens, but they are not sufficient. And many pathogens usually find a way to circumvent those lines of defenses. And that's going to lead us to the second line of defense.